All right, another episode of Digging Deeper, except this time, for those watching, they can tell it's more intimate.
It's we've changed things around. We've even got like a new graphic and everything.
Yeah, and I get to look straight into the eyes.
20 minutes of uninterrupted eye contact. That's what they call hell for introverts. No.
Well, welcome to hell on the Digging Deeper podcast today. And here we go. Pete and Brandon, we're doing it. What we got today?
Yeah, so man, just a great Memorial Day weekend, and we kind of changed things up, even musically, and the message was kind of a different direction. It was kind of neat. So I wanted to jump into, first of all, how I was feeling on Sunday morning. Because
so we're talking about feelings when we're looking in each other's eyes.
We are. We're gonna have some like sad music playing behind us right now. Johnson, put that in. You looked at essentially the passage where Paul is on his missionary journey, and he goes to Athens. This sort of famous speech he gives, and really, for those that maybe hopefully you've watched it or had a chance to catch up, the idea was. When you're wanting to communicate your faith, your beliefs, the gospel to other people, what are some, you basically gave practical suggestions from looking at how Paul did it and said, here were 6 things I think you should consider when it comes to sharing your faith. And the first, and I don't want to recap all 6 of them. I'm more just digging deeper. We want to kind of ask some questions behind the scenes. The first thing I wanted to say, and I was sort of trying to think through in my own head how to phrase this as a question, but I do think it's something worth putting out there. Digging Deeper as a podcast, we kind of look behind the curtain, but in many ways, your entire message was looking behind the curtain. It was almost like a message that you would give to a group of people who were saying like, hey, we want to go share our faith, help us. But you were giving it to the entire church and the internet. And I this is where it's like, not in a sense that like, I guess what I'm curious is this. There was a couple who I know sitting near us who are in the process of thinking through whether or not Christianity is something they're buying into. And I know like my own wife has sort of spent some time reaching out to them. I had this moment when you were preaching where I was like, if I was maybe, let's use this word, a seeker or a questioner, would this feel like, are you guys manipulating me? Do you just have like this like secret 6-point plan that you can like do this, 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 and this, and then bam, you got them. Almost like a multi-level marketing scheme or something. Not scheme. They're not schemes. My wife does multi. Yeah,
that's your wife's job, man.
But this idea of like, okay, so here are 6 things you need to do to get to sort of like win them over. And I don't believe that's true, but a person could, I think, have been sitting there thinking to themselves, are you basically just telling me that this is your sales pitch and this is how you're manipulating me to like win me over? And a lot of your points really were like, hey, it's got to be relational. You got to get invested. You need to make sure you know the people and care about the people, which on the surface, like, yeah, great. But then it's also like, wait, so are you getting to know me because you're just trying to convert me? Like, almost like, I guess, how would you respond to maybe someone that was listening to you and saying, these are all great points, but am I a project? And you said that a couple times, you don't treat people like projects, but at the same time, it was also like, well, are you just getting to know me? Are you just doing all of this because I'm a project? Like, where's the line for that, I guess?
I'm not sure if I would know where the line's at. I guess maybe the question I would ask is, when you pursued your wife, did you do things intentionally that you knew would woo her to gain greater attention from her in hopes to be with her?
Yeah, I had an agenda for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what I would say is, out of my and our love for Christ and our belief that he is the most satisfying entity or whatever in existence, like he is what life is about. My passion for him and desire for others to experience that, I want to do anything I can to help people know that. And because the central element of my faith is himself. He is love, right? Like that is, God is love. Like I feel like that there are parts of how I treat people and how I go about wanting people to feel in order to hopefully persuade them to consider the Lord. It's not, in my mind, it's not manipulative. I'm actually using the very elements that God created us to exhibit within relationship with one another to point them hopefully to the one that I want them to know is Jesus. And so I actually, that couple that you're referring to, I thought about them. Second service, I was looking at somebody that I was like, man, they totally know that there's an agenda here. And I think that's the thing, is there is absolutely an agenda. Like my agenda is that I want them to know Jesus, but my friendship is not predicated upon them saying yes or no to that. Right. And so like there was actually a family member of one of the kids that I coached, and I referenced one of the people on the team that I've been talking with and buying books for, and it's like I'm thinking in my head, like, is that going to get back to him? I
was thinking the same thing. I was literally sitting in my chair and being like, man, what if that guy watches this? What's he gonna think?
And if he does, I would say the same thing. Like when I fell in love with my wife, like there were definitely things I did because I knew that she was on the outside looking in. She wasn't sure yet, and I was like, I want to make sure she's sure. So I have an agenda, absolutely, but it's based out of my love and just my being enamored with who she is, and I want that for everybody. Like I just think that but the things that I talked about are how you should just treat humans in general. And so I think that if I lie to say there's not an agenda, then I'm lying. But if people feel like, and I truly show that my only reason for wanting to know you is because of this agenda, then there's a problem there. But the people that I'm referring to, that even like I'm talking to, I will still be in relationship with them, even if they say no. I have friends that have turned their back on Jesus over the last 20 years, and I'm still friends with them, and they know I want them to come back to Christ, and I'll do anything I can to help them encourage that. But my place in their life and my friendship with them in life has not changed because they are not succumbing to my agenda, so to speak.
Right. That's helpful. And I made a joke about it, but for 12 years, my wife was in multi-level marketing, and there's definitely personality traits that handle that differently. Sometimes it made me uncomfortable. I think as I was listening to you talk and some of those thoughts were running through my head, it wasn't like, I think Brandon's turning this into multi-level marketing. It was more like, how do I help make sure the people that I'm reaching out to don't feel that? But the reality is, and I think you kind of just said it, was like, my wife for a long time was selling handbags and she thought they were good handbags, and she's like, yeah, these are helpful. I think that could help your life to have these organizers and things. And because she thought they was good products, she was okay saying, I have an agenda. I'm trying to sell you this. But we have been commissioned by God to offer the truth about life and eternity.
Yeah.
And so, like you just said, there is an agenda. On the flip side, though, and this is something I was also thinking, my brain was just kind of running on Sunday morning. Anytime my wife convinces somebody else to buy a large utility tote, we make money, right? I don't get anything.
That doesn't happen in church world.
And I think that's the thing. Like, I have an agenda, we have an agenda, but we don't gain anything from it. Like, we're not like getting a kickback. An angel doesn't show up like, all right, here's your 7% for that soul. It literally is because we think this is better for human beings. And so I appreciate it. I thought it was good. I think I wondered if people might have felt that or, so changing directions a little bit.
Just to add to that, like if we're digging deeper and pulling back the curtain, like we do that with service planning.
Yeah.
We intentionally create services that have a mood and a flow and a flow of energy of like what's going to be exuberant, what's going to be funny, what's going to be somber and reflective. We do all of those things in hopes of creating an environment for people to be open to hearing the message. And so there's an agenda there too. But I think in those things, we're also tapping into ways that God has wired us and using those for the good. Like that human emotions do respond in this way in these types of settings, and music that's at this pace and tempo usually elicits this type of response for people, and other tempos will do other things. It's like we do that all the time. I just don't feel like it's manipulating, because I feel like I'm trying to align with the way God's wired us to respond, and helping them respond to the most important thing ever, which is Jesus. So
I think as long as we're honest about, and I think what people have a hard time with is when someone has an agenda but pretends they don't.
Right.
And I think being like, no, this is what we're about. This is why we do what we do, because we think this is true.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get into one of your specific points, because it's also an area that I think can create some problems if we don't think it through well. One of the key words that came out, I don't know how often you used it, but the idea of contextualization. And, just to paraphrase or bring that, like the idea that like you can have an idea or a concept that people in the church might understand, but someone outside the church, what are you talking about? And how do you take these ideas and communicate them in a way, or put them in a way that people understand and make sense in their world and their life? One of the challenges with contextualization, though, and that's a fun big word that nobody uses, but is...
Which I realized that we're on stage. And I said, why did I call this point contextualization?
I think people understood it, though.
Okay,
I think people understood
okay.
it. And really your idea, you compared, here's Paul. First he goes to the Jewish people who understood all this stuff. And so he's just like Messiah, king, prophecy. And then he goes to the Greeks who are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, well, let's talk about these idols you're looking at right here. And let me tell you about the God that you don't know here. Like he took the message and put it in their world.
Right.
The challenge, though, I think that, and I had a conversation this weekend with somebody, and in a different way, it sort of came up of like, sometimes it can feel like a person's effort to contextualize can actually be diminishing or watering down the message. Almost like there's this accusation that makes a lot of sense if you're in Christian circles of becoming too liberal. Like liberals make things so contextualized that they're not even really telling the truth anymore. Because I'm so concerned with you just getting the message, I'll sort of like, I'll make it really simple and easy. That way you don't have to struggle with it. And I wonder, like, where is the line when sharing my commitment to Jesus with another person of trying to help them understand it in their world and their understanding, but also not completely watering it down just so they accept it?
So what's the line?
Yeah, like how would you talk someone through that?
Well, I think that if you're sharing your faith, I think there are core elements of the kind of the big story of God and what's necessary to believe and to receive even in order to become a Christian. And if those elements get compromised or not presented, then I think that there's a problem there. I think that there's this notion of how things began. There's the creation. There is the issue of what God intended and what God started was skewed and marred by our sin problem. And there is this issue now that needs resolved, and how Christ is the rescue and the remedy for that. And then what does that mean then in terms of not just what I receive in terms of when I say yes to Jesus, but now what does that mean for my call in my life? And I think that those kind of four elements of creation, fall, rescue, and restoration, how you phrase those, how you verbalize those, what imagery you use to try to help people see that. But I think it's really important that people recognize those elements. And because if people just say yes to Jesus, but they do not receive the notion that they are sinners, then you've missed a significant aspect of why Jesus came and died. And if you're just wanting to escape someday because you want to go to heaven and see the people you love that died, see them later, like you're missing what Jesus came to burst heaven into earth right now on, and giving us the Holy Spirit to be active witnesses and ambassadors in this life. And so you're missing out on people knowing that Jesus can make a difference, not just eternally, but he can do it today. And so, but those elements, and starting with God make things good. Like if we just start with sin and everything sucks, right? Like then what's the purpose anyway? Like, but if we know that there was an intention that God had, and he deemed humanity as good, and we were made in his image, then we start to understand why we see the brokenness and the evil in the world and things like that. So I think that there's core elements of the gospel story, so to speak, that need to be in there, but how I communicate that, imagery and illustrations that I use to point. That's contextualization. That's knowing your audience and trying to understand what's going to resonate with somebody you're talking to.
And you gave an example from last week of using the Will Smith
Will,
thing. And I don't know that you directly referenced it, but in the text, Paul actually, there's a place that literally in quotes, Paul is quoting a pagan philosopher poet. And I remember when I was very new to Christianity, and this is true of a lot of people, when you're new to Christianity, you're just a fireball
Zealous.
of passion and judgmentalism. And I remember going to a church and they were doing a series called At the Movies. And again, I'd been a Christian at this point for maybe 6 months. And they were doing like, this was a long time ago, but at the time it was like, I think Austin Powers was popular 20 years ago, maybe. And they did a whole message around the Austin Powers movie. And I remember just sitting there thinking, this is of the devil, you sinners. That's not a Christian movie. And, 20 years later, I look back on that and I my brain kind of wants to find the middle ground. I'm like, would I use Austin Powers in church? Maybe. But like in the same context, like that's a form of contextualization. The way Paul said, hey, your poet said this, in him we live and move and have our being. We are his offspring.
Yeah.
Your movies that you watch tell this story. When you went and watched Star Wars, and here's the messianic figure of trying to save the day, like putting things in a way that other people are like, oh, I see what you're doing, but also sometimes being like, that might be too far. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think even the culture you find yourself in sometimes defines how far is too far.
Yeah.
Both of us growing up in the Midwest, it's far more conservative, and the lines to cross would be far more closer to the right than moving out here to Southern California. And you can go a lot further because it's more permissible. So even your culture itself will define what's permissible and what's not. And I think you just got to be aware of that. Like as a college pastor for, years before this, I would never have had a conversation about the gospel drinking a beer with a college student, even if they're 21. Because I sat with college students and their greatest vice was Saturday night parties and frats and stuff like that.
Right.
And there was even more of a stigma a little bit with alcohol in the Midwest. Coming out here, I don't have a problem, depending upon knowing if the person I'm talking to has a problem with alcohol, I'm not doing that. But to sit with somebody and to have a glass of wine or a beer and talk about spiritual matters, like that's contextualization. I actually think that helps because it helps that person feel comfortable to have a conversation in a setting that seems natural to them. So, but I'm always reading those things and making decisions. And so that's why it's really hard to say you can do this, you can't do that, because you have to know, well, where are we talking about this at and with who are we talking about this
Well,
for?
It really ties in, and it was going to be kind of my next question or thing. Along with contextualization, you also, Paul goes to Athens, and the first thing he does is he looks around, and he learns about who they are. And you kind of took that in this way of like the most effective form of evangelism is actually getting to know people and becoming friends, relationships. And so, like Paul talks about becoming all things to all people, and which again almost is like, well, that sounds a little fake, but it's like, well, here he's saying, no, I'm willing to, if you're at the bar, I'm gonna go to the bar, if this is where you're at, I'm gonna come over here and meet you there and to connect with you. One thing I wonder though is like, and is it maybe like there's a line or there's a balance, obviously, of saying maybe the most effective or whatever, but clearly you can share the gospel with someone that you don't have an intimate relationship with. I mean, Billy Graham did it massively. So I guess I maybe I'm wondering like, and I know you were trying to make a specific point. And sometimes when we preach, we can't say everything we want to say, but like,
and Paul didn't know these people he was talking to.
Yeah. He wasn't like best friends with them.
Yeah.
But I think maybe at least, and you can go on this further. I felt like what you were saying was not that, hey, you can't share your faith with someone unless you become best friends. It sounded like you were more saying the most effective way.
Yeah.
Is that, and I mean, maybe like,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there are people like Billy Graham or, that he's kind of like the extreme example because he's like, been used by God to reach thousands, if not millions of people. But there are people who have gifts of evangelism and man, they can strike up a conversation and they can share the gospel with people whether they have a relationship with him or not, and find, to be effective. But at least in our context, I would even say here in East County, San Diego, many of the people that are there in the room are maybe blue collar to white collar, not a ton of Bible education in terms of like they haven't gone to seminary and all this other kind of stuff. And so I want them to realize that the most effective way, I believe, is in the spheres of relationships you already have, because there's trust that's cultivated, and then you can just share the overflow of your life, which hopefully is saturated with Jesus. And you'll find that God will use that in the form of evangelism. But it doesn't mean that you can't share your faith. I mean, I used to I mentioned going to New York City and be on the streets and doing prayer stations, and those sometimes will lead themselves to sharing the gospel. I just met that person 5 minutes ago. So it's not a this or, it's a both and. But I think in our very suspicious culture, and uninformed culture, as far as like not really understanding as much as they used to, like what the Bible says and what's about, relationship and longevity probably have a better chance of winning out versus something like right in the moment and spontaneous.
Let me end with this, and I wasn't planned that you just said it. So, we did a Holy Spirit series in November and talked a little bit about gifts and stuff. This didn't come up, and it didn't come up in your message either. But I don't even know that I have an answer to this question. I'm really curious what your thoughts are. If someone like myself were just to say, Brandon, as a pastor, as a study of the Bible, what does it mean to have a gift of evangelism? And if I don't have it, isn't that kind of like, well, God didn't give me that gift, so I don't need to do this? Like, I don't know. I'm curious. Yeah. Is it just extroversion? What do you think?
I think a lot of the gifts that scriptures mention, spiritual gifts, there are elements that reside in every person, but there's almost a supercharged nature to them with people who like possess the gift. What I mean by that is I learned this a lot from watching Colleen Crandall, Mike's wife. I think all of us would say, without a doubt, scriptures call us to serve one another, be hospitable to one another, love one another, those types of things, right? Like everybody's supposed to do that. But then you get around someone like Colleen and you're like, I definitely don't do that if that's the standard, because it's supercharged. It's like there's a superpower for her. Like she can just do so much more, cause so many more people to feel loved and valued and dignified and provided for. Like she has a gift of hospitality. I'm still supposed to be hospitable, but the level to which she's hospitable, it is a spiritual gift. I am called to share the gospel, right? That's the Romans 10 verse. It says, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Like I'm supposed to do that. But there are people, whether they have oratory skills, whether they're extroverted, that they have a magnetic personality, whatever the case, but there are people that God uses to draw lots of people, and they are able to communicate at a different level. It doesn't mean I'm not supposed to. I just, that gift isn't there to potentially have maybe as wide range of an impact. But there's still impact that comes with it. And I think a lot of gifts are like that, like leadership, like I might not have the gift of leadership in terms of like, oversee some massive company, but I'm still supposed to be a leader in my household with my spouse and my kids or wherever I'm at.
Yeah.
So I guess that's how I look at a lot of the gifts, that we possess them, we're called to them, but there are people who, when they're gifted in them, like it's just another level.
I think that would be affirmed even like Paul mentions there's a gift of faith. Every Christian is supposed to have faith, but clearly he's saying there's something that maybe some people have.
Yeah.
Do you, personal question, do you see yourself as having the gift of evangelism?
No, I don't.
It's more of a forced thing for you, or something you gotta.
Yeah, evangelism scares the crap out of me.
Yeah,
to be honest, and that's why relationships. I think I have the gift of relationship. I don't know if there's even a gift. I have the gift of connecting people. I'm really good at that. And God uses me to connect people in different spheres, and I can adapt and be with. I think I can. I don't know what that gift's called. I just know that I can do it. And so for me, it's easier to share my faith in knowing people, because I gravitate towards serving and helping, which then opens the door to sharing. But just cold turkey and sharing my faith with somebody, or going up and knocking on a door and all that kind of stuff. Like, I remember someone having me do that in college when I became a Christian. They're like, yeah, let's go door to door and knock. And I was like, that was awful for me. I did not, but I watched the person, his name was John Bricker. And I remember going with him, And he would knock on a door, and all of a sudden it's like, how do we just get in the house? How do they just say yes to Jesus? I was like, I could never do that. Like, he had a gift of evangelism. And so when you see it, you know it. I can do it, but I don't think it's my gift, so to speak.
Maybe I don't know if this is a question or a statement. It might be more of a statement. I think that in most churches, maybe all churches, are in some big way ultimately somewhat of a reflection of their lead pastor.
Yeah.
And I do think that if your lead pastor does have whatever this thing is, a gift of evangelism, I think it becomes almost like part of the culture in a big way.
Yep.
And what's interesting is when people, this is an oversimplification, but I think you would know that a pastor probably is an evangelist if every Sunday ends with an altar call, because that probably is how they're wired. And if a person leaves that church and comes to Rise City, they might be like, well, how come you don't do that every week?
Yeah.
And it seems like maybe how we approach is a reflection of who you are and how you're wired. And
I think if Robert pastored Rise City Church,
it'd be that every week.
it'd be more evangelism, because that is his heart, and he's good at it. He's passionate about it, and so he's going to directly and indirectly influence and shape a culture that's going to be highly evangelistic. And that's just not us, and I'm okay with that, because the body of Christ has many parts, and there are other churches that do that, and that's okay. But yeah, I think there's definitely, I don't know if you pastored the church, we would be a highly educated church that knows a lot of incredible things and knows how to apply them in our lives.
It would be horrible.
I don't know if it'd be horrible. I'm just saying it'd just be like, it'd be different than the one with Rise Now.
Yeah.
And if Ben or Jean, like, we'd all wear different clothes, much skinnier and tight and cool and all that. And
we would be a lot cooler.
So much cooler. Right, Jean? Jean's behind the camera.
Amen.
So this happened to me. I was at Christmas time. You were there. Our mother-in-law bought us pajama shorts, and she got you this pair with like this Jaws shark on it.
Yes.
And she got me a pair with Skittles on them. And I opened them up, and I'm like, what am I ever going to do with these? And I just threw them in somewhere. And then a few months ago, I was like, maybe I'll try them on. They're the most comfortable pair of shorts I own.
We need to finish this episode if you're confessing that you wear Skittles underwear
Last
and
night,
you love them.
I was walking around with my Skittles shorts on, and my 12-year-old daughter looks at me like I'm the biggest tool in the world. She's like, you're wearing Skittles shorts. And I said, you know what? I'm 43 and I have 4 kids.
Yeah.
I don't care. Go to bed. And that's my motto for life. So
yeah. And you'd just say, and Jean and Ben would probably wear those and they'd be cool.
They would be cool. They started wearing them. So
I know.
Then I could be like, look, I wear cool stuff. It doesn't matter.
So at this point, you're driving somewhere, listening somewhere, watching somewhere, and you're like, this is digressed and we're done. And you're right. It is done. So
all right.
Yeah. So this week we'll continue Acts 18. We're getting close to the end of Acts. We're going to speed through the last 10 chapters and close this thing out by the end of June. And
Start something new.
Yeah, start something new. But
All right.
that's where we're at. Thanks for joining with us.
See you guys.